We believe that some stories must be challenged.
Not because they're bad stories, quite the opposite, actually.
Exactly. It's because the best fiction, the most compelling stories, often hold up a mirror to the ethical gaps in our own world.
And that's our mission here. We're continuing this inquiry into popular fiction, looking at how it reveals moral truths, how we reason as people,
And what we call ethical asymmetry.
which is really just the gap between what a society claims to value and how it actually operates.
And to do that, we don't just read the book.
Mhm.
We run it through a critical filter. We use a step-by-step framework.
Looking at the story's internal logic, the fairness of the world it creates.
And crucially, whether the characters grow.
Mm.
Do they move from just having opinions towards something like genuine wisdom?
And today we are applying that exact lens to a really popular book. It's Direbound, the first in the Wolves of Ruin series by Sable Sorensen.
A dark romantasy.
Very dark and very trope-forward. It's all built around these lethal trials and psychic bonds with giant direwolves.
And it's been incredibly successful at creating tension and momentum. But like you said, it leans heavily on those established genre templates.
Which makes it a perfect test case for our framework. It gives us a controlled environment to see where these tropes work and where they might fall short ethically.
Right. And before we really get into the material, just a quick note on our format. You are experiencing a unique two-host AI conversation powered by Google's Notebook LM for deeper, more dynamic book summaries. Our goal today is pretty straightforward. We want to look past the action, past the romance, and really ask a fundamental question.
What truth claim is this book trying to make? About human nature or society or morality?
To even begin to answer that, we have to start with the world itself, the engine that makes it all run.
And that engine is the main character, Marin Cooper.
Our heroine.
She's a street fighter. They call her an alley cat, and she's from the poorest quarter of the city of Nocturna. She's just trying to survive, taking care of her sister Selah and their mother.
So right from page 1, she's in survival mode. Her anger, her class rage, it's already there, and it's completely justified.
It is. And then the situation immediately becomes lethal. Her younger sister, Selah, is kidnapped.
Which forces her hand.
Completely. She joins the army, not out of some sense of duty, but as a desperate move to find her sister. And that funnels her directly into something called the bonding trials.
And let's be clear, these are not just some fantasy boot camp.
Not at all. They are designed to kill.
So what are the actual stakes here? What happens in these trials?
It's a two-phase ordeal. First, recruits have to climb this deadly mountain, which is filled with monsters, to try and form a mental bond with a massive direwolf. Many don't survive the climb.
And if they do?
If they succeed, they enter a 4-month kill-or-be-killed training program at the academy. Now, Marin is already a good fighter from her life on the streets.
She gets a raw deal.
A terrible one. She's unwillingly chosen by a completely feral wolf, one who just refuses to communicate with her.
So a huge disadvantage right at the start, inside a system that's already set up to chew up and spit out people from her class.
Exactly.
And that, right there, is the story's ethical center. The core engine isn't just Marin trying to prove she's a good fighter. It's a story powered by structural injustice.
You see it immediately, the stark contrast. You have the elites, the established bonded pairs, living in total luxury. Meanwhile, the common people starve and are used as, well, as cannon fodder for the military.
And the kidnapping of her sister, Selah, that elevates everything. It's not just about raising the physical stakes anymore.
It reframes the moral stakes.
It completely shifts the narrative away from a simple proving herself story into something much darker and I think more resonant.
The question becomes,
What will you sacrifice? Not just your body, but your morals, your principles. What lines will you cross to save family inside a system that's completely rotten?
And that protective love for her sister is the anchor. It's what keeps the story from just being bleak. It gives her a purpose beyond just surviving another day.
Speaking of surviving, that's where all the genre elements really come into play, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Let's talk about the key players.
We have to start with him.
We have to start with Stark Therian. He is the cold, punishing, and of course, beautiful instructor.
The ultimate icy lead. It's setting up that classic.
Slow burn, enemies to lovers path. The book really embraces its genre. You get hints of a love triangle, you get the fated mates sort of dynamic.
And you see reviewers making the same comparisons over and over.
Yeah.
It's Fourth Wing meets the high stakes of the Hunger Games.
It hits those buttons very effectively. And this is where our framework becomes so useful. When a story relies on these powerful, established archetypes,
We have to ask, how much real moral growth is happening.
Are the characters just expressing opinions shaped by the plot, or are they actually gaining wisdom?
Exactly.
And if we use that Adlerian scale we mentioned, a lot of the early character work, especially the banter between Merrin and Stark, it sits at the level of opinion and knowledge. The tropes are familiar, they work, they create great tension.
But it's surface level.
It's very well executed surface level, but it hasn't yet earned that deeper genre-transcending wisdom.
That's a fair critique. If the characters are just reciting trope dialogue, they haven't started thinking for themselves, morally. But I will say, where the story does feel deep is in its emotional core.
I agree 100%. Merrin's protective love for her sister, that justifiable class rage, and the raw, almost primal bond between her and the wolf, those parts feel entirely earned.
And those elements, loyalty, trauma, the fight for agency, that's what moves the story forward. It helps you, the reader, understand what it feels like to maintain a self inside a system designed to dominate and use you.
Which brings up emotional reasoning. This is a very dark book, and it deals with primal emotions, fear, bloodlust, pure survival instinct.
And we see that in the graphic violence, which a lot of reviews point out. So the question becomes, for us, does all that intense emotion clarify Merrin's moral compass?
Or does it cloud it?
Right. Does it show her the clear path to saving her family, or does it push her into doing things she'll regret, just because survival demands it in the moment?
It's a double-edged sword, really. Her rage makes her strong enough to survive, but it also risks turning her into a reflection of the brutal system she's fighting.
Speaking of that brutality, let's zoom out from the personal to the systemic. Because this world is just a textbook case of a philosophical failure.
It really is. The book puts you right inside a state machine that systematically uses its poor for its own ends. These forced trials, the coerced bonding, its conscription dressed up as an opportunity.
And all while the elites are visibly getting preferential treatment.
It's a complete violation of reciprocity.
And this is where something like the Golden Rule becomes such a sharp analytical tool, even for fantasy.
Because the entire institution fails that test instantly. There is no one who helped design this system who would ever consent to putting their own child in Merrin's shoes.
To climb that mountain, just for a chance to serve and survive.
It seems like such an obvious moral failure, but that's the point. That's what makes this book a useful springboard for talking about real-world power, class, and the moral cost of security.
That distinction is key, isn't it? The difference between genuine security for all and controlled domination of the many for the benefit of the few.
That's where the ethical asymmetry lives. In that gap between the ideal of a protected society and the reality of a predatory one.
Okay, before we bring this all together, let's pause for just a moment. Mindful Moments is our YouTube channel offering AI book analysis, summaries, and critiques. A perfect way to keep inspiring reflection and rational thought. It's also incredible.
Right. It often prioritizes the heightened romantic beats over a really rigorous exploration of its own ethical premise. It's incredibly entertaining, but it sometimes sidesteps the deeper intellectual work.
Which leaves us with some big open questions the book doesn't quite answer.
Like, how did the system become socially legitimate? Why do the citizens, even if they hate it, seem to accept it?
And what other choices do they have? It really seems like it's join the army or starve.
And for those who do join and survive, the non-elites, how do they justify their participation? Are they complicit? Are they fighting from within? The story leaves those fascinating gaps for us to think about.
So let's try to land on a balanced evaluation. What does it do really, really well, and where does it fall a little short?
For achievements, you just have to look at the reviews. It's a very solid first offering. The pacing is incredible, the tension is high, the world building is clear. It executes the genre conventions masterfully.
But the shortcomings are kind of tied to that same success.
They are. The heavy reliance on popular romantasy tropes can sometimes make the characters feel like they're checking off boxes instead of being fully unpredictable people.
And the voice, at times, can feel a little YA, a little young adult, despite the very dark graphic content.
And then there's the ending. It's a deliberate, designed for a series cliffhanger.
Which is brilliant for business. It makes you want book 2 immediately.
But it's intellectually frustrating because it doesn't resolve the ethical arc of this first story.
So bringing it all home, what's the practical takeaway for you, the listener, who's interested in this kind of critical thinking?
I think this book is less a profound meditation on justice and more of a fantastic, lively case study for applying a framework like ours.
It's a map. It lets us see exactly where commercial fantasy is holding up that mirror and truly exposing a structural injustice.
And where it might be using that injustice more as dramatic fuel for the romance or the action plot.
And being able to tell the difference between those two things,
Yeah.
that's the real value.
So, without spoiling anything, I think the story's enduring lesson comes back to Marin's loyalty. It teaches that the fight for justice doesn't always start with grand ideals. It often starts with that primal, visceral need to protect family, which forces you into a confrontation with a system that demands you sacrifice your own humanity just to survive.
That's a truth claim worth thinking about. Which leaves me with a final, provocative thought for you to take away from all this. When fictional systems built on exploitation finally do collapse, is that collapse caused by moral necessity, by human weakness? Or is it caused by the inherent logical flaws of the system itself? Think rationally about that distinction. Click the link on screen to subscribe, share, purchase via link, and think rationally.